Okay, so we are moving on to a new type of graph. Last week we talked about dot plots. This week we're going to talk about something new, and it's going to be something completely new for your brain. So it's called stem and leaf plots, and a stem and leaf plot is just another type of graph to organize data. So we need to understand what the different parts of a stem and leaf plot represent. So first, it tells me that this stem and leaf plot represents test scores or test grades. So I'm noticing that on a stem and leaf plot, it looks like a T-chart. On one side of my T-chart, I see stem, and on the other side of the T-chart, I see leaf. Now the stem, in this case, is going to represent our digit in the tens place. Now it can represent the hundreds, the thousands, so on and so forth, but we're keeping it simple, and we're going to keep it in the tens place for now. The leaf is going to represent the digit in the ones place. Now, before I move on to doing anything else, I want to make sure that I always look at the key first. No matter what type of graph I'm looking at, the key is going to be super important because it's going to tell me how I should be reading these numbers. Well, it tells me that 5-6 equals 56%. So it's telling me how to read the stem and leaf plot. So let's look at what that means. Well, let's look here. I notice that there's a 5 in the tens, which would represent 50, right? So if I have a 5 in the tens and a 6 in the ones, what number does that represent? 56. So that means one student made a 56 on their test. Let's move on to the 60s. If you notice, there are multiple numbers in the ones place for the 60s range. All that means is that more than one person made a score in the 60s on their test. So let's look at what grades they made. Well, I have a 6 in my tens, and I have 1 7 in my ones. So someone made a 67. Oh, I see there's another 7. So that means I have a 6 in my tens and a 7 in my ones. So that means 2 people made a 67. And then I also have a 9, a 6 in my tens and a 9 in my ones. So that means that we have 3 scores that were in the 60s range. Now let's look at the 70s because there's a 7 in the tens place. Well, I have a 7 in my tens and a 2 in my ones. Notice how I'm crossing off to make sure that I have all the numbers. I have a 7 in my tens and a 4 in my ones, making 74. 7 in my tens, 7 in my ones. 7 in my tens, 7 in my ones again, so 2 people made a 77. 7 in my tens, 8 in my ones. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people made a score that was in the 70s. Let's do the 80s. And I'm going to go a little bit faster. I have an 8 in my tens, a 1 in my one, 82, 82, 83, 84, 88. So I made sure that I recorded all of the scores for the 80s and now the 90s. 9 in my tens, 0 in my ones, 92, 93, 94. So what this did is it helped me to visually see what numbers were on this stem and leaf plot. And that's really going to help me when I go answer these questions. So I'm going to help you guys answer these questions so you can use this video as a guide when you are doing your assignment for a grade this week. So it's really important that you do this strategy right here. We always talk about strategies in math, and this is the strategy that I want to see. Because what this does is it really helps your brain see what numbers are on your stem and leaf plot. So let's look at number 1. What is the difference between the highest and lowest test score? Well, I know I want the difference, which means to do what? Subtract, good. between the highest and lowest test score. So highest scores, where would I look on the tens side, on the STEM side? In the 90s, good. And what's our highest score in the 90s? Good, 94. And I also need my lowest test score. Where would I look on my STEM side for the lowest? Good, the 50s. And we only have one test score in the 50s, which was 56. And now I subtract 94 minus 56 gives me 38. So 38 was the difference between the highest and lowest test score. Okay, moving on to number 2. How many students scored a 77% on their test? Well, it's a good thing we did all this work over here because we can look to see how many times we see 77. Well, of course, I'm going to look in my 70s range, and I see 177, 277. So that means that 2 students made a 77 on their test. So that means that my answer is 2, because 2 students made a 77. Okay. Number 3, in which range did most students score? So I want to look at what grade range most of the students scored in. So which grade range has the most scores? Well, 50s only has 1. 60s has 1, 2, 3. 70s has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 80s has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 90s has 1, 2, 3, 4. So which grade range had the most scores? The 80s. Good. So I'm going to put 80s for my answer here. Okay, and last one. How many students scored above an 80? Above an 80, very big key word. So that means that it can be 81, 82, 83, 84, so on and so forth, as long as they scored above an 80. So let's count how many scores that we listed here are above an 80. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are 90s higher than 80? Yep. 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 people made a score that was higher than an 80. Okay, guys, so this is how we look at stem and leaf plots. So you're going to use this video to help you answer the questions that you're going to be doing on your own that are going to be very, very similar to this. So go back to this video if you need help and make sure that you do this strategy. Super, 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 super important. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. We can Zoom, we can chat, we can do whatever.